Is our consciousness the same as these artificial things that we're building? Right now, I think probably no. But the reason is these artificial things don't have self-models in the same way that we do. And that's just a matter of time, and not that much time at that, right? And so there will come a point when these machines build self-models in the same ways. In other words, they believe with absolute certainty that they have subjective experience in the same way that we believe that we do, using the same kinds of basic information processing modes. That's coming.
You're listening to Inner Pioneers, a podcast for curious minds who want to understand how to navigate change, crises, or simply the call for something new. Join us as we dive into real stories of transformation and learn from leading voices in psychology, science, and human development how to move through inner shifts and seasons of change. I'm Christopher Kabakis, and now let's begin pioneering. Hello, everybody. It is my great pleasure to welcome Professor Michael Graziano today with us at the podcast. Michael, you're a professor of neuroscience and psychology at Princeton. You have published a lot of scientific articles, of course, but also have published some popular books, which I have read as a non-expert. For example, your latest popular book, Rethinking Consciousness, and also an earlier work, Consciousness in the Social Brain. But what I find very interesting, you have also published a fictional work, The Divine Farce, which is a play on the Divina Commedia, the Divine Comedy by Dante, as a person of Italian and with Italian ancestry. And you have published Death My Own Way. And I haven't read these, but I'm very curious to ask you about kind of this connection between your scientific work and publications and also the literary work. Next to writing, you also compose music, you have told me before, and sometimes play music, but not publicly. And you are a hobby ventriloquist. I think that's a very interesting portfolio for a professor. And have I forgotten anything?
You've covered the basics there, and thank you very much for having me on your podcast.
Yes, I mean, you have created one of the central scientific theories of consciousness, I would say. And so I'm very interested in talking with you about that today. The podcast is examining how personal development works, how transition phases work in life, how personal growth work. And of course, this is also a question about how the mind works and how consciousness work. And so with you today, we have the absolute expert on board to answer this question. What is consciousness, or how does it work? Maybe the functional question is easier than the essentialist question, what it is. And so maybe let's start with this question first. After studying consciousness for years or so, right, professionally, and as a practitioner of consciousness for 50 something years, what would you say if I asked you today what consciousness is?
Right. So I think that's a very good question, right? That's the question everyone wants to ask. And there is a sense in which you already alluded to the answer, that there's a essentialist and a functionalist approach, and asking what is consciousness in some ways is a little like pointing to a car and saying, what is drive aroundness? I mean, it's a thing that the car does, and you can understand the components and the parts and how they conspire to make that action thing happen. But it's a little hard to point to a thing and say, that's the drive aroundness, that's the consciousness thing. I do think that impedes progress a little bit in consciousness. I would say, if I had to summarize it, and this is a summary that nobody ever likes because it's so contrary to intuition, and it takes a lot of unpacking before you really kind of see what it means. But I would say people say they have a conscious experience because their semantic networks, cognitive networks, have that information in them. So they believe it. They say it because they believe it semantically. And they believe it semantically. They have that information in those semantic networks because there's deeper parts of the brain hidden beneath our cognition that are building those kinds of bundles of information or self-models and piping it up into our cognitive networks. And in a sense, that's the explanation for why we say and think and insist that we have a conscious experience, because there's very deep structures in the brain building these kinds of models of self and effectively telling our cognition, our semantic understanding, telling it, this is true, this is what's going on. And we as a system, as a whole system, a person as a complex system of information processing and body and brain and so on, we don't know anything else. That's all we know. That's all we ever have access to. And so everything we say and believe and think about ourselves or the rest of the world stems from that kind of process. So that's kind of the root, the heart. Consciousness is a type of self-model constructed deep in the brain outside of our cognitive networks, but then it's pumped up or piped up to our higher cognition. That's kind of that's the basic answer.
Okay, so so you say it's an informational output of maybe a state of a system, of an information processing system or so. But you say it's being popped up. That sounds a bit like global workspace theory. So it comes from the unconscious. You said the right word, and then it's being made conscious somehow. And wouldn't you also have to explain how it transitions from where we don't perceive anything to how we perceive something?
Well, your account mixes
okay.
layers, right? Because one can't explain consciousness by invoking consciousness. One can't say, oh, I'm conscious because the unconscious part decided I am and then told the conscious part. Like that literally makes no sense. That's just a mixing. From my point of view, as a neuroscientist, ultimately, we are these big biological machines made of neurons hooked together by synapses, right, that process information. And information about, we say we have consciousness. That's a clue that we can say it. It comes out of the mouth. Anything that can come out of the mouth depends on information encoded in neural networks. Otherwise, it can't get into the speech circuitry and come out your mouth. So it has to ultimately be in the form of information represented in neural networks. And then one can trace where the information is and what's constructing it, right? And so ultimately, yes, there's going to be something kind of like a global workspace, meaning a part of the network, the overarching network, some part of it is densely connected to our speech output, and we call it cognition. And this is the part that when stuff gets into it, that's the stuff that we can talk about. And some of the stuff that gets into it, some of the information that gets into that thing, you could call it a global workspace if you want, but some of that stuff says, there's a car over there, there's a tree over there, I'm sitting in a chair, there's a me, right? But there's also information in there that's saying, and I have subjective experience of those things. And without all of that information, you can't think the thought. You can't articulate the concepts. Somehow, all of that information has to be represented in those neural networks. So that is almost like, from the point of view of a neuroscientist, at least, a logically necessary set of conditions.
I have so many questions, and I heard already elements of what is the attention schema theory, the theory that you're probably most famous for, and that I would like to illuminate today. But first, making a little detour on the personal side. So how come you got interested in this question, asking those questions about how does it work, consciousness, mind, and so on? It must be your personal story in a way that explains how you got to this line of work.
Yeah, I mean, well, it depends on how long you want me to go on answering that question. But I think, first of all, it's a question everyone's interested in. Like, we all have this stuff. And everyone with any sense of self-reflection thinks about it and wonders where it comes from. We all have some intuitions or biases or hypotheses that we all have, that we all grow up with. I think I got interested in it as a scientific topic very early, like many people did. I read a lot of books on this and that and thought, oh, this is so cool. I wish I could study this. I think anyone who becomes a neuroscientist or a psychologist in particular tends to think on those topics. But really studying it from the point of view of a scientist in the lab. That didn't happen until much later. Well, let's see, that was probably about 2010 when I began to focus on that in the lab. And a number of things happened. First of all, I had studied lots of different topics in neuroscience, real nuts and bolts kind of topics, how the brain processes sensory input and how it controls movement. And one of the key realizations or insights in neuroscience is that the brain builds models of things. So you look at the world, but what you see is actually models, informational models constructed in your visual system at the back of the brain. And you move and control your body, but this depends crucially on your brain building a constantly updating model of where your limbs are and what they're doing. And for example, I think one of the clearest examples of the brain building a model is this phantom limb phenomenon. So if you're very unlucky and you get an amputation and you lose your arm, you'll probably for at least some period have a phantom arm. So the brain's model of the arm persists for a while, for some people for years and years. So the brain builds models of things in order to monitor them and predict what they're going to do and help control them. And so that kind of work led directly to this set of thoughts, this whole line of research actually about what happens when the brain starts building these models, not of the outside world, not of the body, but of its own internal processes. So it can keep track of what it's doing and predict what it's doing. And the key, I'm rambling on a bit, the key to these self-models is that the brain doesn't need to know the details. Like, it doesn't need to know, oh, I've got neurons that have synapses, and there's GABAergic synapses, and then there's this pathway from there. Like, it doesn't need to know that. It just needs to know general functional information. Like, I have some kind of capacity to understand things and grasp onto them and focus on them. And if I do that, then I can respond to them well. But if I don't, then I can't respond to them well. I have a memory which allows me to kind of keep track of things, but my memory is not perfect in this and that way. So these kind of vague, amorphous properties that the brain needs to know about and builds models about and serves as the basis for our concept of mind and consciousness and will and all these kinds of things.
Okay, then let's go to the attention schema theory right away, because it's already in there, the grasping with this amorphous power.
Yes.
So because there's a grasping in the real world, right? And to control the outer world, but then you work on subjective experience or awareness is a lot about the will. This I can move energy or something. There are different words for it, and grasp something else. And maybe please explain to us like how you think about this, which is the attention schema theory, I think.
So it's very simple and along the lines of how it emerged. When I first wrote about it, I didn't realize it was a new theory. I thought it was just a reasonable way to systematize what everyone knew. And I wrote a little book about it, and people read that book, and neuroscientists came back to me and said, well, what are you doing writing, proposing a new theory in this very unscholarly way in a book that is for the general public? Shouldn't you write an actual article on your new theory? And I was like, what? I did? New theory? And then I thought about it. Eventually I wrote an article called something about consciousness and social perception, a novel hypothesis. And that little phrase at the end was actually meant ironically, because I couldn't believe it was actually a novel hypothesis. But anyway, the hypothesis is really simple. The brain has this thing that we call attention. It's a process. It's not really a thing. It's a process. And of course, people mean lots of different things by that word. But I mean something very specific that a neuroscientist or maybe a psychologist would mean, which roughly speaking is the brain can focus its processing resources. It can deeply process a small number of things at any one time. And then it kind of ignores or only shallowly processes everything else. That's attention. And we think of it often as like a spotlight, right? And you can pay attention to a location in space in front of you, but you can pay attention to the sounds of birds behind you, or to a thought, or you can pay attention to what your memory is telling you about what you ate for breakfast. And as you do that, you'll find your attention being retracted from the world around you as you apply it to these internal events, or you can focus your attention externally and so on. So your attention is limited. It's limited. And attention is, maybe people don't always realize how important attention is the reason why we are intelligent. Because without it, you would have to have a brain the size of a planet to process the world, right? So with a very small brain, so to speak, or a limited 3-pound brain, if you deploy the resources smartly, if you can focus in and deeply process only key things here and there, then you can be extraordinarily intelligent with respect to those key things and filter out all the junk that you don't have to process quite so much. So attention is super important, but we also have to control it. We have to move it around. It isn't just being yanked here and there. I mean, it is partly a little shiny object. Boink, your attention goes right to it. But you also have to be able to move it yourself. You have to be able to say, no, I'm going to focus on this book I'm studying and ignore the party over there. Or you have to say to yourself, no, I'm walking through a potentially dangerous situation. I better not be paying attention to my inner monologue. I better focus over there and focus on the tree and make sure I'm not going to get jumped. So you have to control everything you do. Say you want to make a sandwich. You control your attention and make it move to the peanut butter jar, and then to the bread, and then to the knife. Everything you do depends on your control of attention. This is literally the heart of who we are as agents in the world. So how do you control attention? We know that every system that controls something needs a model of the thing it controls. There's a principle emerged more than 100 years ago now. It's fundamental to robotics, for example. It's fundamental to almost all of any kind of complex engineering. But if the brain is going to move its attention around and control it and predict what external forces might knock your attention around, then it needs a model of attention. It needs to be able to say, oh, my attention is doing this and that, but also it needs to be able to say, my attention is the thing that can do this and that. It's the thing that makes me able to do this and that, right? And so the brain builds a model, and it's a simplified model. Like I said, the brain doesn't need to know about the synapses and the particular pathways here and there. So it builds a simplified model, and in that model, that bundle of information, basically what the brain is telling itself is, I have an essence inside of me. It's the essence that allows me to mentally grasp something and understand it deeply. And when I do that, it allows me to respond to it in a complex way, and it allows me to remember it, and it gives me a vivid sense of what it is that my mind has grasped. But if I don't do that and I have not grasped it, then I can't think about it deeply, and I can't react to it very well, and I might not remember it later. And so the brain essentially tells itself, it's building a picture, painting a picture of what its properties are. And the picture it's painting is, I have a kind of amorphous, non-material essence. It doesn't have a physical basis, because the brain doesn't need to know about the physical basis. So the model says, forget about it. It doesn't have a physical basis, just like an energy maybe, and it's inside of me, and it allows me to be conscious of some things and have conscious experience of those things and not of other things. And that's at the root of what allows me to react or prevents me from reacting. So that's the consciousness thing, is the brain's model of what its own attentional focus does. That's the attention schema theory in a nutshell.
Exactly. And so when I encountered this, I loved it, because you really explained it pretty well, what was missing, or what is often missing. It's not enough to just have a model of what I'm processing, so the content of something. You give the example of an apple. So an apple in front of me, it's not enough to have that. And it's also not enough to have a model of myself.
Yes.
But we need something in between that connects
the
model of myself to the apple. Yeah. And that is exactly what you just explained, kind of a model of myself in the process of attending to the apple.
Yes.
And so this kind of the attention schema because it's simplified, you say.
Yes.
And then this is, because it's simplified, I think you would argue it feels like an amorphous power. I am grasping the apple with my attention in a way.
Yes.
I'm attending to the apple. And then, as you said, like then I can report. Like if people ask me, are you aware of the apple? Then you would output something like, yes, I am aware of the apple. Otherwise, I couldn't say it, right? I would just have a model of an apple and myself, but I couldn't say, I am aware of the apple.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yes. So perfect. If you had just the visual model of the apple and someone said, is there an apple? You could say, yep, there's an apple. And if someone said, are you aware of it? You would have to say, can't compute. What does that mean?
So yes. And so this made sense to me in a very intuitive way, because so when people meditate, they often let go of the contents of experience, of objects, including their thoughts, right? You're being trained to let go of the thoughts and of all the information. And you even lose track of your own body. You could say parts of your self-model, or maybe of your self-model, I don't know. And what remains in the deep meditative state is pure awareness. That's how it's called, which is basically the attention schema is a model of this, or a theory about it. But how I imagine it is this pure awareness. It's this pure amorphous power to grasp things. And we have a sense then for this as potentiality. No, I can do things. I could process things or so. Would you say that that's where it meets? The attention schema is almost like the pure awareness in Buddhist meditation tradition, or Zen meditation, or?
Yes. So there's lots of different kinds of meditation, of course, but especially focused attention meditation, I've always thought is deeply related to this whole attention schema business. And here's the interesting wrinkle about the attention schema idea, is that attention, what it really does is it enhances the brain's models. So when I pay attention to the apple, what that means is the apple, I see it, my visual cortex builds a model, informational model, and then attention is the process by which that model gets enhanced so it can have a bigger impact. So attention is a thing that operates on models and enhances the model.
Mm-hmm.
The attention schema is a model of attention. It's informational. It's the bundle of information that the brain constructs that stands for, represents attention. Now, what happens when you pay attention to the model of attention? Like the process of attention enhances things, enhances models. Well, why can't you pay attention to the attention schema, the model of attention? That's what I think a lot of meditation is.
Yes.
Essentially taking attention, the process, and focusing it on the model that depicts the attention. So you're attending to your attention, or you're focusing on what do I know? What does my brain know about the thing in me that can focus on things?
Exactly. So that's why sometimes I think Dan Siegel as well, he says, I become aware of awareness itself.
Yes.
Those traditions use the word awareness, and you, of course, use much more the word attention, which I like also. And of course, then you have this idea of the model of the attention. So there's one thing that I want to ask you about. So the awareness is this informational model of attention. And attention is a data handling trick, you call it somewhere. And now you just also said attention is signal enhancement, right? Certain signals are boosted and others are down regulated. This is an abstraction, right? It's like a theory that tries to understand how these things work. But one question I have is how a model itself doesn't move anything, no? It is an abstraction. And so how do you connect it back to something that, because you anchor it always in the brain, right? You always anchor things in the brain. And in the brain, there is also, I guess, would you agree, energy? How is the engine powered? The information needs to be instantiated somehow, somewhere, and powered by something, which is, I don't know, our body and our brain. Because sometimes I'm wondering, so the anchor for this abstract modeling, isn't it rooted in our biology, which is not just, let's say, because you say sometimes computer or machine, it's not like the machines that we have built, the computers we have built. And there's some other stuff going on maybe, which might lead us then to some things that might distinguish us from artificially built machines or computers, like the feeling of something or other things. And I wonder, and would you agree, or do you say that it's different things? I confuse things, that maybe the brain or the consciousness that we have is a different kind of computer than the machines we have built. And that is why we struggle to explain certain features like sensations, emotions, creativity, or I don't know. Or is it, am I going too far?
So you're alluding to a lot of things that are out there in the field, actually. And it's become very popular, I think, as a reaction to the rise of AI, especially in the last couple of years. LLMs that suddenly talk people in ways that, frankly, 5 years ago, nobody believed would be possible, at least not for another couple hundred years. And now suddenly here they are. And this is I think, very philosophically threatening. Maybe not so much to the average person who just is like, yeah, whatever, cool. But to the philosophers and to the neuroscientists and to the people who've been thinking about this, it's very, very threatening. And I think there's a backlash. And the backlash, which we've seen before in the second half of the 20th century, when computers started to rise, we saw a backlash that led to philosophical concepts like the hard problem. No, there's things that we can never understand, right? And that helps save us and make us special and separate us from the machines. I think you're seeing the same kind of backlash now, this enormous kind of visceral push to make sure we're different from those machines. And so one of the most common ideas is, well, biology has all this stuff in the cell and chemistry, and then it bubbles up and then it affects the higher layers and so on. Personally, I know this sounds a little flippant, but personally, I actually do think this idea, the original concept of it, got into the public consciousness, got into people's minds through the midi-chlorians in Star Wars. These little deep biological things deep in the cells that bubble up and add to the force and change your brain and mind and make you magical. This is where this idea comes from. And it has about as much scientific merit as that. So the problem is, yes, neurons have biology and they have energy and they have this and that. It's all true. But in the end, neurons talk to each other, especially over distances longer than about a millimeter. They talk to each other via axons and synapses and action potentials, or a signal that causes a pulsatile effect at the other end. Like, this is how one neuron connects to the other. And if you're talking about the feeling that emerges from the biology, how does the feeling cross a synapse? How does the feeling travel through a little spark of electromagnetic signal and then hop a synapse and get to the next neuron? And then if the feeling emerges somehow out of all the energy stuff and the cellular stuff, how does it specifically impact the activity of neurons in a network, making this neuron a little more active, that one a little less, in exactly the right pattern, so that the overall pattern of activity in the network perfectly represents the information I'm having a subjective experience? How does it do that? Nobody ever addresses that. They just make this very naive assumption. If the feeling emerges, then I have it, and that's why I talk about it. But that's actually not an explanation. I mean, there's a lot of things the brain has that we don't know about moment by moment and can't talk about. So anything we say about ourselves, including, no, there's a feeling, no, it feels like something, no, there's an experience, no, it's the consciousness part that's special to me, all of it logically, necessarily has to stem from information that is represented in these patterns of activity in neural networks, or what's called an embedding, informational embedding. It has to be the case. So I know I'm going on again a little bit long, but I want to circle back to another thing you said. Specifically, is our consciousness the same as these artificial things that we're building? Right now, I think probably no. But the reason is, these artificial things don't have self models in the same way that we do. And that's just a matter of time, and not that much time at that, right? And so there will come a point when these machines build self-models in the same ways. In other words, they believe with absolute certainty that they have subjective experience in the same way that we believe that we do, using the same kinds of basic information processing modes. That's coming. Not here yet.
Okay, I have questions about that. If you say, so it's conscious awareness or consciousness is an informational model of attention. Then, of course, when we think about a model, we think about abstract information that we would write down on a blackboard or into a book, or we can think about and so on. And this abstract information, graphs, figures, data, numbers, and so on, that it seems to be of a very different quality. And then we got to qualia, of course, the taste of chocolate, the scent of a rose, the love that you feel for your child, and so on. And it seems like a bit under-explained to say, well, it's just a model of attention, because it feels like it's very rich. And how is this instantiated? Because it seems like that the machines that you just mentioned, the LLMs and so on, they probably don't know about qualia. They process abstract information, and they can they build models, but it's more like the abstract models, like a chess program, program that is programmed to play chess and so on. And how do you respond to this? Because you say subjective experience as well.
Yes.
Sure. How does your theory explain qualia?
So very briefly first, the models that we have right now, at least until very recently, are all text-based. That's all they get. I mean, now, of course, we're moving into visual models and auditory models of information flowing into these machines. But text is a very abstract modality. Language is an abstract modality. But think about the human brain. When I talk about information and models, automatically the assumption is, or the intuition is, oh, this must be a cognitive model, right? Like I learned about something, like someone told me about, I don't know, a math thing, and I'm like, oh, I think I understand that math thing. That's a cognitive model. The brain builds other kinds of models as well. And so when you look at something, or when you smell something, or when you hear something, there are parts of the brain that are translating the world into a model, that model, information bundle. And it's very rich. It's not a cognitive abstract semantic model. It's a very rich sensory level model, perceptual level model. So just to take the example of vision, which is a better understood modality, but you look at something like the green grass, and you build, or your coffee cup, and you build a model of your coffee cup in your visual system. Here's the way that model differs from abstract or semantic models. Number one, you can't help it, right? It's automatic. You don't have top-down control over it. If your eyes are open and it's light and your head's pointing at it, unless you're a very unusual person, and there may be some weird cases, but most people can't help building a model of that coffee cup in their visual system. It's number two, it's a very rich model. It's got all kinds of little nuances and this and that and shiny here and that there and colored differently and shaded. Very, very rich model. And number three, it comes with meta information. Meta information that essentially tells your brain this is real, right? So this is an area of psychological thought which is really interesting, has been studied for a while, and it's been called source monitoring. And so one of the things that the brain does is monitor the source of information. And it's really interesting when the brain gets it wrong. But source monitoring basically says the brain has to tag information with this meta information that says, that's real, it came from the outside world, or that's a hypothesis, it came from the inside world, or something else, that came from my memory, I pulled it out of my memory. And that does actually sometimes get scrambled, and people think something came from the outside world when it didn't, or vice versa, and people make mistakes, and we all do. At a low level, we make some of these mistakes, but we're pretty good at it. So these rich automatic sensory models come with this meta information. So when the information from these models bubbles up into cognition, cognition is also informed. This is real. This is reality. This is not me inventing it. in a semantic way,
Mhm.
right? And so that I think is the key. And so when you have this visual model of your coffee cup bubbling up that says this is real, and you have another model that's also equally automatic and rich and low level bubbling up that says there's a thing called that I'm going to call experience, subjective experience, and it's attached to that coffee cup right now. Now you have the information set all supplied to your higher cognition, such that if someone asks you, are you conscious? You have a subjective feel of what it looks like to look at that coffee cup. Then you have the information necessary to answer, yes, I do. I'm sure of it.
So it's like a co-presence of your attention schema, like your subjective awareness, with whatever else is being in the field of attention. I call it this way, and then it's present. It's there for me when the object is there, and also my awareness, my attention. Then the output is it's there. And I remember you said in your book, location is a great connector. So it's all together. My brain will process it together. It like the form and the color and I don't know what. But the ultimate connector is this subjective awareness, this amorphous attention schema that brings together everything that is there, that has been pushed up into the...
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, that's right. So mind, and some people have said mind. Dan Siegel, he has said mind is the ultimate connector. You would say the attention schema maybe, or I don't know, subjective experience is the ultimate. Awareness is the ultimate connector. Yeah.
So that's a key point. So mind, in a sense, is another way of talking about attention. Right. So when you just think about it, I got reminded of something. It is literally reminding. It's something that got put back into your mind, and that's out of sight, out of mind. What's in his mind right now? So these are basically a colloquial way of thinking about what is in the purview of attention. What's in that area of stuff that has been enhanced by the process of attention, so that it's influencing these higher networks like cognition. That's what that is. So mind and attention and the global workspace, they're all kind of synonymous. So attention can operate at many levels. So we're talking about the highest levels of attention. But that's basically what that is. So yes, that's exactly right. Mind, attention, and global workspace. But if something gets up into your mind or your attention or your global workspace, whatever it is, it gets up into there, like the car you're looking at, and someone asks you, do you have a subjective experience of the car? You can't answer that unless you also have information. Your brain needs information about what the heck subjective experience is and what state you're in at the moment. So you need that. You need a model. That is, you need that extra piece.
Yes. So let me circle back to this question of the information. Because you say the information, the models I'm talking about is not just abstract, it's also all the other information that comes to me. So it can be a taste, a touch, visual information. So the attention model and all those sensations and perceptions get processed together, and then I can say I'm aware of them. And you say there's no reason why maybe machines should not be able to have such a self model. And do I hear you correctly to say there is no reason to think that machines can also not process information, touch information, visual information, smelling information, and emotions like love in the same way together with attention? Is that right?
Yes.
And why do you think so? Because I would say so. John Vervaeke, a professor at University of Toronto, he has said, for example, the LLMs and so on, the artificial machines we build will be never like us because they don't care about the information. And we care about the information. And the reason we care is we have those biological organisms, I guess, one of the reasons. I don't know. How would you respond to that?
First, we're talking about emotion. And nobody really quite understands how emotion is instantiated in the brain yet. Right? So there's that. We don't know how to build that stuff. It's much easier to build vision, about which a great deal is known. It's much easier to build higher cognition, about which much more is known. So that's the first point. I don't know, but I don't think LLMs have anything like emotion. I think they're at a stage right now where that's not what they have. So what is emotion? I think what you're saying is exactly right. Emotion is rooted in the body. And there's very, very old theories going all the way back to William James about emotions being partly interpretations, our brain's interpretations of sensations detected in the body, right? And so the body has what's called the autonomic nervous system, and there's a flight or fight response, the sympathetic nervous system, and there's sort of the resting, digesting, feel comfortable response, the parasympathetic nervous system, and they operate together, but they kind of do a push pull, and one's high and the other's low, and so on. And all the time, these two systems are operating, even in kind of casual situations. There's a little bit of one or a little bit of the other, and we have these changes, actual physiological changes to blood pressure, to the amount of blood in the skin, so we can blush or get very pale. The eyes can constrict and expand, or mouth gets dry. Blood pressure can go up, heart rate can go up, adrenaline can go up. All these changes can happen up or down. And then we have sense organs in the body that take all that physical information and send it up into our brains. And through many, many layers, mostly way beneath the cerebral cortex or cognition or anything like that, there are systems in the brain analyzing that information and assessing the state of the body. And then eventually these things get up into the more abstract parts of the cerebral cortex, and we get to say, I'm really viscerally feeling fear or love or anger. And these emotions are partly constructs of the brain, but they're really anchored in the physiology of the body that's detected by sense organs. LLMs don't have any of that, like literally none of that. And so I do not believe they have anything resembling human emotion. But can they? Well, in principle, yes. Because here's the thing. You could build a lot of this stuff artificially. You could build sensors, or you could simulate it. You could have a simulated body with these simulated states. And so is there a future where LLMs have emotions and it like people do? Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't see that as happening soon, because I think there's technological issues that are way outside of the range of what people can do at the moment. But on the other hand, technology moves faster than anyone thinks and in discontinuous jumps. So I don't know when, but I'm pretty sure eventually, yeah, that's going to happen. But I totally agree. LLMs right now are semantically increasingly intelligent. Like, they do understand what they're saying semantically, but I don't think they care. I think that's exactly right. I don't think they have the emotional side to that.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Okay. So you would say, okay, they don't care, and probably they don't care because they don't have the body, and the body cares in some way or makes them care through emotions. That makes us care through emotions, and they don't have that, but they understand. And I wanted to ask you also about this comprehension part, because some would say, I mean, the way that classical information, and you correct me because you know much more about this, is defined is more like in the Claude Shannon sense. It's a measure of surprise. We want to reduce uncertainty, and then we get the classical bits, 1 or 0s, right? Which is clear, 1 or 0. Some people have said this is a syntactical definition of information. It's more a measure of how surprised are you by the following words or symbols, right? Or not. And the LLMs, I think they work like this. They have enormous correlation matrices and they predict what's the next best word. But that wouldn't be meaning, right? That wouldn't be understanding as we in everyday terms think about it. And is maybe the way we think about information and meaning different from the scientific way information is defined, or even like how the AIs are being programmed? And doesn't that make a difference?
Yeah.
So the meaning
Yeah.
of life. Like, I think the LLM can simulate something. It will simulate an answer. If I ask about it, what's the meaning of life, it will tell me something. But is it like the same, or doesn't it matter? Would you say it doesn't matter?
So a lot of people have that perspective that you just outlined. And I've heard this millions of times of people, they tend to glom onto this idea that, well, the LLMs, what they do is they predict the next word. That's what they do. They're giant prediction engines, and they're just like big linear algebra machines and doing correlations. Here's the problem with that kind of thinking. People are machines that predict the next muscle contraction that we need to make in order to get along in the world. That's all we do. It's like literally the only purpose of having a brain is to control movement in a complex world. And creatures that don't move at a fast interactive rate don't have brains. All right. And so that's what you need a brain for. It's just there to predict the next muscle contraction. And the way we do it, in order to be able to do it effectively, you can't just twitch and then hope that you get the right twitches. And you can't just have some simple correlation matrix that says if this kind of input comes in, then twitch that way. The way we do it is we have deeper layers. And in the deeper layers in our brains, we build abstract representations so that it isn't just what is the muscle pattern. In our deeper layers, we have abstract representations of dogs and love and cars and breakfast and hunger and all the things we need to help build a picture of our world at the most abstract conceptual level, so that then those concepts can be arranged and manipulated, and then a response, a general response can be determined, and then that general response can get bit by bit translated back into the individual muscle contractions. That's the only way to react, to know how to effectively react to a complicated world, is to build these deep layers that have these deep abstract representations. This is literally exactly what the LLMs do. And so, yes, they are predicting the right next word, but they cannot do that unless they have deeper layers, and they do. These LLMs can have, 50 layers from input to output. And in the deeper layers, especially maybe about 2/3 of the way through in these deeper layers, you start seeing patterns of activity. So these are sometimes called embeddings or sometimes called vectors, but they're representations. They're the same kinds of representations you see in the human brain. There's a pattern of activity among neurons that stands for something. And the things they stand for are very abstract. And so you can go into these machines in those particular hidden layers and find the neurally represented signals or symbols or embeddings that stand for dogs and cars and love. Like they have these abstract concepts at least. And whatever it is about the world, the roundness of the world or the largeness of space or whatever, these really abstract concepts are represented such that those abstractions can be manipulated, and then the right response can be formulated, and then bit by bit transforms back into individual words to put out. So it is not just predicting the next word. It's doing it by means of building deep internal, super abstract conceptual representations of the world. And we know it's doing that because we have direct access to it. And we know it's doing it in a way that's spookily similar to the way the brain does it. And maybe that shouldn't be a surprise, because they are modeled after the most essential insight into how the brain works. Namely, the brain is made of neurons hooked together by synapses, and the synapses change strength as a result of learning. So that these things learn to do this it's amazing. But on the other hand, in retrospect, it's not that big a surprise. But yes, these machines semantically understand what they're saying at a deep conceptual level, the same way that we semantically understand. But on the other hand, you're right, they lack things like emotion because they don't have the architecture. They don't have all the things we have. They're not built to the same architecture that we are. So they have some of the things we have, and they lack others.
Now, the architecture connects to what we're speaking about. So this often we think in terms of hardware and software, right? And the software is running on the hardware, and we want the hardware to be very predictable and stable. So actually we get like the reliable 1-0 bits relationships or outputs and the logarithms. And so the machines are being only on the software level, right? And the hardware level is irrelevant to them also. No, they don't know, or they don't care that they're being on silicon wafers in Abu Dhabi data centers and in, I don't know, Utah data set. But we care. So maybe we get back to the body thing. So there isn't like this. I think what I hear you say is the mind, consciousness, because you speak about models and functions, of course, this is the software layer. And you say the hardware is not relevant. We could instantiate the software of the mind in different substrates. So like silicon, it doesn't need to be the body. And there's one question I have, and it's really hard for me to put this into words, but we know that reality deep down is quantum, right? So, and it's not the classical physical way, right? It's not 1 and 0. There's this deeper layer. And there are all kinds of weird aspects of quantum physics, of course. But there are some people who say, okay, if we ground our physics properly, we need to do it to ground it in information theory. And then we should ground it not in classical information theory, but in quantum information theory, which has different properties, right? And so maybe, would it be an option, or am I totally wrong to think that our bodies, brains, are coming out of this world? I mean, if our deepest theory about this world says it's quantum, also our bodies and our brains must be quantum at some level. And at some point, we cross a threshold maybe into classical, because as you say, the brain, it has the synapses, and then we have the firing, and the firing is much more 1-0. It's either a fire or not. But below that, we have all the chemistry, the biochemistry going on, all the cells that have their own intentionality, maybe even they do their own stuff in this big concert of the whole organism. Isn't that quantum? And then we have this problem that, and maybe that's why we can't explain feelings and emotions, because actually there is the information processing that happens is quantum, which has different properties than the classical. So tell me if I'm totally wrong here, because I'm not an expert and you probably know much more.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, I mean, I'll tell you a little bit of what I think. As actually an ex-physicist from long ago, I've tried to think through some of these quantum proposals. I think the word quantum is very dangerous, because people basically say, "Oh, there's this amorphous thing we don't understand, quantum physics, and then there's consciousness, we don't understand that, so they must be related to each other." And there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
And I do think a lot of the way neurons work in the end is classical. Like, classical physics is the consequence of quantum mechanics at statistical scale. And so you get up to the level of a neuron and how it's communicating to other neurons, and it's mostly classical. It's really not that quantum. You have to get down to the tiny level of individual ions moving across, membranes and so on. And then you're definitely in the quantum realm. There's lots of quantum stuff going on down there, but there is everywhere. I mean, that's how the world is built. Most of the behavior of how neurons talk to each other and process information can be understood at a classical level, and it can be extraordinarily well modeled or represented by fairly simple linear math equations, which is why these big AIs have worked so well. So that's one point. And second, there's something that you say that I know you're just asking me about it, but many people say that, how maybe the quantum explains how we have a feeling. And my concern with it is it's always the same question. As soon as you're asking, how do we have a feeling? I think you're putting yourself out of business. Right. To me, this is like, just to give the analogy. Well, I'll give you a couple analogies. One is that, imagine the ancient Egyptians saying, where is the hole in the ground that the sun goes into at night when it goes into the underworld? And now we're going to search for it and spend lots of money and lots of effort and try to find the hole, and you will never find it. And as soon as you decide this thing literally exists, now let's find it, when it doesn't actually exist and you just have a simplified concept, you're out of business, right? So when you ask, what causes the feeling? What makes the feeling emerge? I would say, suppose the feeling emerges. You still have explained nothing, because you haven't explained how a feeling makes your neural networks have the right information embedding so that you think you have it. or know you have it or can talk about it. And so the thing that has to be explained is, well, how does the brain build models? And we already know that, at least in the general sense. And what's the particular adaptive benefit of this kind of model that's telling us we have magic in our heads, right? Instead of saying, what causes magic? How about what caused us to either develop or evolve such that our brains build models that tell us we have magic? So I would point to that when yeah. So anyway, that I think that's my answer.
Yeah, no. I mean, I totally get this idea that, I mean, if you have the wrong theory about something, of course, you look in the wrong places. You look in the ground for the hole, for the sun, and then you don't find anything and you're confused. And does that mean that when you say, I have a feeling, so when I say, I love a person, then you say, well, I don't know if that's true or not. You report that you love it. So let's see, how can your brain model something that you would report as love? And then you think, and you say, well, love is difficult. We get to there later. The easier things are visual things, for example. No, because I don't know, the self-driving cars already can process visual information. And so, but we will get there. And so you say we will get there, or do you say it's an illusion? I remember also there's a little discussion in your book about this illusionism. So no,
I wouldn't okay. Say it's an illusion. I have trouble with that word. And also I have trouble with, so a very common take would be, so if you try to explain how the brain does it, then you're explaining it away and you're saying it doesn't really exist and you're saying I don't really have love. And that's not true either. To explain something is not the same as explaining it away. And, you know, I used to be a motor physiologist and I studied the arm and the hands, and I don't anymore. I used to know all the bones and all the muscles and everything. So now that I understand, or at the point in time that I understood it all, does that mean I can take a big axe and cut my hand off and throw it away because I don't need it? I just explained it away like it's done. No, I still need the thing. I still rely on it. I still use it, but now I have some knowledge of how it works. And this is really important, I think, for people out there to understand that the purpose of science isn't to explain things away so we can discard them. That's not what happens. You explain something and then you gain a better appreciation of it, and you never lose the need for the thing that you were originally studying. So we don't explain away love and we don't explain away experience. What we do is explain how a brain comes to these certainties and intuitions and beliefs about itself. In the end, that's what we're explaining. But here's one more analogy that I often use to try to get the point across of magic, and how the important thing here is, how does a brain think it has magic? So suppose, let's take the phantom limb case. And suppose, unfortunately, you have an accident and you lose your arm and you have a phantom limb. And now there's two classes of explanation about the phantom limb. And one is the typical one today. Well, the brain built a model of your arm. It's automatic. You can't help it. It's running under the surface and it's sending information up into your cognition. And that's why when asked, you can talk about it and say, oh, there's the arm. I can close my eyes and know what my arm is doing and feel touch and cold and heat. That's one explanation. The other explanation, which actually did pass as an explanation at one point in history, was no, there's actually a ghost arm growing out of the stump. Just take it at face value that the thing we think is true as such. So the brain builds a model, but let's assume the model's literally accurate. There is literally a ghost arm. Sure, we know that when you ask someone about their phantom limb, the only way they can respond is because their brain has a model of a limb. But let's assume for now the model is literally accurate. And now let's set ourselves the scientific task of explaining the hard problem. What creates the phantom? What creates the ghost? Is it like the quantum wiggles at the stump? Is it the integration of information of the cells at the stump? And what's it made out of? Is the ghost arm made out of energy, or is it made out of quantum mist? Is it like an electromagnetic field that's invisible? And then the third problem, once you think you've explained where it comes from and what it's made out of, now you're stuck having to explain, well, how does this phantom limb specifically affect your brain, the neurons in your brain, and tweak their activities in just the right pattern so that your semantic networks know that there's a phantom limb so that you can then talk about it, right? So there you have a whole host of problems that arise when you take as literally true the content of a model that the brain built, because the brain's models are always schematic and always a little sketchy. I mean, they're quick and dirty, right? So now that's exactly the same problem we have with consciousness, right? We report it, we say it, we believe it, we insist on it, we know it at gut level, but all of that emerges from the brain's models that are built probably automatically, probably at a very deep level. So they're not semantic models, they're more like perceptual models. Their information, their output is piped up to our semantic network. So we think we have these things, and we say we have these things because of these deep automatic models that are being built. This is all very nice. But if we assume that the models are literally accurate, we assume there literally is a ghostly essence of magical feeling inside of us, what caused it? That's the moment that almost all consciousness researchers, at least until recently, have set themselves. That's the goal. That's the Egyptians trying to find the hole in the ground that the sun goes into at night. As soon as you set that task for yourself, well, what is the magic essence of experience and what causes it? Then you're out of business. Like that's the moment that you have failed to grasp what's actually going on and put yourself on the wrong path.
Okay. I mean, one could say that the phantom, the feeling of the phantom limb is malfunction of something that usually works well. So you can't prove that something is not working properly or not real just because sometimes it malfunctions, right? If you could say, I report I love someone, but that might just be a phantom limb thing. So it doesn't really exist. It just exists in my perception. And the more interesting question you say is how does your brain do it? No, so I mean, how you anchor it always.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So and you would think that if we advance our current neuroscience and information science far enough, we will get to the point where we can teach the LLMs how to construct not just self-model where their computational resources are allocated right now, but they would also be able to model all kinds of sensations. The visual is the most easy, you said, like which I mean intuitively makes sense because you see the cars, they already are processing it somehow that they can work with it. And then maybe even smell and touch, and then even maybe the feelings. And we could model it into them, and then they would think it's real as well, like we do, because we have the model that works this way, right?
Yep.
And it's independent of the substrate, probably, and independently of energy, if that exists at all. I don't know, because when I looked into this in the preparation, I came with, you have to instantiate the model, right? So there needs to be like some physical stuff. So there needs to be energy and so on. But then there are some approaches that say, no, in information theory, if you go to computationalist ideas about everything, then you don't need matter, you don't need energy, because it's just like information processing and the structure of constraints in which ways the information is allowed to be processed in reality or so on. So then you don't even need the energy anymore and the physical matter, maybe. I don't know. I don't know if you would say this is information-based approach. And so in the end, I don't care so much about matter. I talk about the brain, but the brain is just an information source in a way. How do you relate to those kind of ideas that which are the border between physicalism and informationism?
Yeah.
Or computationalism?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, physics at the most fundamental level is very mathy, right? It kind of is math. And you can, I suppose, say the universe is math, which is just relationships, informational relationships between things. And that's a really interesting point of view. I think, again, there's a tendency for people to hear that and say, oh, so you're saying it doesn't exist. And we can just think it differently, because I can think different kinds of math, so therefore maybe I can think the universe into different states. And that's really not how it works. But you can kind of understand what's going on in the universe at a math level, or at the level of informational relationships between things. Again, I'm not sure. I mean, that's going to be very useful for understanding the mind. I think there's a lot of wonderful, I mean, the math of LLMs is beautiful, basic linear algebra, but it describes how neurons, huge numbers of neurons, connect to huge numbers of other neurons, and how the connection strengths change, and how that results in abstract symbolic thinking, right? It's absolutely amazing that all of that math is so well formulated and understood. I will say this, though, in terms of substrate independence, that what we have so far in understanding the brain, and especially what got translated into technology, is still kind of simplified. Right. On the one hand, I'm super impressed, and I think these machines think, and I think they've captured the essence of how neural networks work in the brain. But they have stripped it down quite a bit. There's a lot of simplification in there, and the brain has other degrees of freedom that are not present in the artificial system. So the biological system, of course, has all kinds of different temporal dynamics to different types of synapses. It has ways that neurons connect that aren't synaptic. It has hormonal ways of signaling, and it has direct, what are called gap junctions or direct connections between neurons. It has glia cells, and something that, of course, people tend to conveniently forget, that 10 times more glia cells exist in the brain than neurons, and the glia cells actually play a role in information processing in ways that are not fully understood. And so there's a lot of stuff in there that the brain figured out that could be hacks and tricks, or they could be fundamental, and we don't know. And so there are differences still. Like, there's a lot that people don't know. So if you could take a brain and take all its neurons and all the synaptic connections, this is called a connectome, and copy it artificially and then set it running, I don't think that would be the person's mind, because I think you're missing other parts of the brain, the physical architecture. I think if you did that, you would have a very confused and unhappy thing. But if you took a brain and you could copy not just the neurons and synapses, but the size of the synapses and the kind of synapse and the temporal dynamics of this kind versus that kind, and the subtle ways that synapses, this kind of synapse can change over time and this one can't, or the hormonal interactions, if you could simulate that, if you could simulate the glia cell, like, you could in principle simulate a human brain, and that artificial version of it would be the person. That artificial version, it would say, oh my God, you did something to me, but here I am, and this is me, and I have my memories and my wisdom and my knowledge and my personality. But I don't think we're there. I don't think so. There are these differences between the biological system, which has some components to it that we just don't understand, and the more simplified but still very powerful artificial systems.
Okay, and I mean that. So you would say it is, at the end of the day, substrate independent if we manage to model it properly down
Yes.
to all the relevant information, and
Yes.
that there is not at the lower level somehow. I'm sorry I said the last time, a quantum effects or quantum information, because this is not clonable. So quantum information is not clonable. So if there is something quantum in there at the lower levels that you can't copy it, that can't be abstracted properly into like a bit, 0-1 bit kind of relationship, then you would say we can, we could.
I think that mind uploading, which is what I was just describing, will happen.
Okay.
Let's just put that. I think it will happen. I don't know when. I think it's a long time off. There are people who think it's right around the corner. I think they're wrong, where the technology is not there yet. But I think it necessarily will happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that makes everyone happy who invest a lot of money into having their body or brains deep freezed at minus something 0 degrees.
Yeah. And I don't know why anyone would want that, but
yeah. We don't know if they will like the future they will find when they are being reactivated.
That's the one thing I always say when people ask me, but do you want your mind to be uploaded? And the answer is no. I'm so glad this will happen after I'm gone.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, so we're kind of maybe nearing the end. As my final questions, I would like to ask you, so this podcast is about, also about personal development and growth. So now we talked a lot about your theory of consciousness and how consciousness works. How do you think personal development happens and growth happens based on your neuroscientific work? Maybe it doesn't have to be attention schema theory, but just based on all your insights into the mind and consciousness. Is there any kind of guidance you could give people if they say, I want to grow, I want to develop, I want to develop my consciousness even? I don't know, or just my...
I don't know. I mean, that's understanding how some of the parts work. That's not really the same thing as having advice on how to be a practitioner and use the parts. I mean, certainly it suggests that things like we were talking about, a meditation, valid. You're training up and strengthening your mechanisms for self-control, monitoring and controlling your own internal processes. Like, that's great. But the biggest, and we've talked about the AI connection. I think that's probably the place where where work on consciousness will have the biggest practical impact, because it used to be consciousness research was philosophy, armchair philosophy, and then it was sort of interesting scientifically, but now suddenly it's the key to our technological future. And so it's something that's of profound importance to the future of our species. I think that's probably the bigger impact than sort of a medical or psychological intervention type help.
Yeah, in your theory of consciousness or awareness, this attention, it's a central character. And I thought it's interesting how much you emphasize this. Attention is the central thing that the brain does, or that our minds accomplish to decide which signals to enhance, which to suppress, and so on, how to steer our attention. And we're doing it all the time. And as you said, like most of the times, probably we do it unconsciously. We just operate our attention as life demands from us, or as we see fit. And to become more aware about this attention mechanism, I think that's very useful. That by putting our attention somewhere, we change our world and we change the world. I mean, so I think this is where I thought, not speaking about awareness, which is a bit fuzzy, but really about attention, and then saying, okay, we can choose where to point the spotlight. And most of the times, we might just pointing it in one direction or in one angle or so on. And maybe if we experiment a bit more with our attention-wielding capacity, then we can make new insights into ourselves and have new insights into the world and so on.
I think that's true. Yeah, attention on attention. Yeah. That's really important.
Yes. Absolutely. Yes. I mean, Ian McGilchrist, he said, like, attention is a moral act. It changes what we find in the world and it changes ourselves and so on. I mean, that's even bigger. You're more empirical, of course, and not so much normative, which is implied by what Ian McGilchrist said. Okay. Is there like any piece of advice you would give our listeners when it comes to attention or to consciousness as you're thinking about it?
Yeah, I'd be very cautious giving advice because I don't know. Well, I don't want to harm anyone. I would say understanding is worthy goal unto itself. And understanding these internal processes is fascinating. It's one of the most amazing things about humans is that we figured out so much about ourselves. And now it's, leaking into our technology in ways that are profoundly transforming us.
Yes. And I was wondering, I think I just remembered that in the beginning I said I also want to talk about your fictional work. And because you wrote those fictional books, The Divine Farce and so on. How has your literary work informed your scientific work and vice versa? Because you write about the big topics, the meaning of life or the meaninglessness of life, I don't know, and death and everything. And how does it like connect or not to your scientific work?
Yeah, I don't know thematically. I mean, perhaps in some ways there's thematic connections. I think it's a very similar process, though, to write a work of fiction or to work through a scientific experiment. I mean, it's a very large project. One has to approach it from both an aesthetic point of view and a very logical kind of reductionist point of view. And so I think it appeals to the same parts of me to work on these different kinds of projects. And also, if you get stuck in one thing, you can just turn to the other for a little while and then come back again. So yeah, I think that's probably the connection.
Okay. So it's a bit complementary or bouncing off
Yeah.
each other, and it's all this quest for understanding, basically. Maybe
Yeah.
the human condition in the literary work and consciousness as a hard-nosed
Yeah.
understanding project in science.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like if you look back, because you have been interested in those topics of psychology, philosophy, and neuroscience for a long time, many years, is there anything you would give yourself as advice as a young man? You said like difficult to give advice to other people, but if you look back at your younger self, is there anything you would say, you should have looked at this earlier or differently?
I would love to have a conversation with my younger self, but I think only if I could somehow set it up so that he wouldn't remember the conversation afterward, because I wouldn't really want to alter his path. He had a really interesting path, and I wouldn't want to steer him away or toward anything in specific. But I just find it fascinating to go back and chat with the guy. I think I remember, but there's a lot that I probably don't. And he may be curious about his future self too. That would be a wonderful conversation.
But then you use the Men in Black device where people forget again.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you are working on a time machine and on this
memory
deletion device. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, Michael, thank you very much for this super interesting conversation, and I learned a lot. If people want to connect with you or learn more about your work, where would you point them?
Probably my webpage. So my Princeton webpage has all kinds of info on it.
Okay, so just Google Princeton University, Michael Graziano, and okay, get there. Okay,
exactly.
Wonderful. And I will do my homework on the quantum stuff, and then I come back for another follow-up conversations.
Absolutely, yeah.
But it's a fascinating field, and of course, as you said, like we all have a natural interest in understanding ourselves better, what this is all about, and you're at the forefront with your work. I always liked it because it's not just emergentism, where it just like appears and so on. But no, so you say there's a mechanism where we can understand it, and you have, a plausible, I feel plausible way of explaining what subjective experience or awareness is. So I always loved it. And
good. I'm glad.
We'll continue to share it with people.
Excellent. I'm so glad to hear.
So thank you very much. Have a good day still in the East Coast.
That's right.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye now.
Thanks so much for listening to Inner Pioneers. If you found this conversation meaningful, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone you care about. Want to go deeper? Visit evolute-institute.com. Until then, keep pioneering, one step at a time.